Yep.
Yes.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, that's good. Except that. Yeah. All right, so I will start. So I'm sure that you've all seen these funny looking QR codes around, and some of you may even have used them, but I hope to explain a few things and maybe you'll learn something you didn't know. Okay, so okay, so QR codes are part of a group of things called visual machine readable codes, and there are many, many in the world because people are very inventive. Some of these you might have seen before. There's the one that you see on the post office puts on addresses. Oh, Dan says my head is cut off. Okay, okay, and the long narrow one is the library barcodes, which I hope you've seen, and there are various ones from different companies, but the standard UPC code that you see at the grocery store. So some of them are barcodes, but the barcodes can't encode as much information as the two-dimensional codes. There are one-dimensional codes. So the two-dimensional codes can hold more information. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay. QR codes were invented in 1994 by Masahiro Hara. He was working for an automobile company in Japan, and all the automobile companies and all the other companies that had assembly plants were working hard to try to figure out how to keep track of all their parts and all their systems. And I know some groups were using RF tags. You know, there a lot of different things were being used. But the advantage of these visual codes was that they were cheap to make, easy to change, and so they were first used for tracking vehicles and components in Japan, but then it kind of spread. They became popular, and by 2005, they had a fairly standardized protocol, but they were kind of not being used too much until smartphones came out. First, the early phones could read them, but not display them, but that wasn't important. It's the information in them that you needed to display, but the smartphones can do both. So here you see a picture of, on the right, of Dan's tablet computer looking at a QR code and just about to read it. Okay, so Alex pointed out to me that there was a great article in the Toronto Star about QR codes and why they are having a surge of interest. So if you're interested in that, you can find that article online at the Toronto Star. Oh, it was Dave's, I'm sorry, Dan says it was Dave, not Alex. I misremembered. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot more about the history of it if you're interested in that. There's also a really good article in Wikipedia about QR codes that has probably more information than that you want to know, unless you're into computer engineering, but there are also some other interesting things in there. Okay, so how do QR codes work? The QR app is a piece of software that reads those little boxes, and it looks for the three big squares. They're very distinctive squares in the three corners. And if it sees those three squares, then it knows it's a QR code. And then it looks at the small square in the other corner to see how big the QR code is and what angle you're viewing it on, because people don't always stand exactly right front in the center with their cell phones or cameras when they're looking at the code. So even if it's on a little bit of an angle or a little high or low or something, it can usually figure it out by checking these reference points. Okay, So now once it finds the reference points, it reads all the other little black dots, little black rectangles, and all the information is recorded twice, once horizontally and once vertically, and then it checks them for error correcting. So if it's the same both ways, then it knows it's correct. So okay, so I was saying that the QR code article in Wikipedia has a lot of information. So if you want to know exactly how it figures out all this stuff, you can read there. Here's an example of kind of stuff that's in there. And I didn't spend too much time on it because I guess I just like them to work. Okay, so the most common use that people have for QR codes is to read them with their smartphone or tablet. Because if you're out walking around in the mall someday, or you know, somewhere, and you were to see a URL written on the wall, you would not likely want to stand there and copy it down on your notepad. But if you see a QRL code, you can just click on it, and then it's the same as if you had written down the URL code and typed it in. Much faster though. Okay, so a lot of smartphones have QR code readers built into them. Well, not so much built in as added in by the manufacturers, you know, for your convenience. And if yours doesn't, your app store, depending on which tablet you have, will have a choice of QR code readers. There's lots of them. And of course, be sure that you read before you download, because as QR code readers, just like the other software that you find, may have, you know, they might have some ads in them or some surprising other software they would like to download, and you just have to look for one that only just reads QR codes and doesn't do anything else. Okay, so once you've got one of those apps, you just point your cell phone or tablet or even your camera at the code, and the QR reader will read the code and interpret it. So here's Dan's tablet again. He pointed it, and you can see the little white corners there, and it found the QR code, and then it went, and there's the Toronto Star article about sending tips to the editor. Okay, so what if you find a QR code and you don't have a QR reader? What can you do? Well, you could take a picture of it with your camera and bring it home, or email it to yourself on your desktop. Okay, so I did this with this one. Actually, Dan sent it to me from his cell phone, and I have Pegasus Mail, so I loaded it up. And then, in order to read it, I had to get a piece of software for your desktop or your laptop. And Dan and I tried a couple. There was one that was highly recommended, but then when we went to find it, it wasn't there anymore because it was based on Java. And you might know that Java has become unpopular, unsupported these days. And so it had been removed. So this one by the Code 2 company seemed to work pretty well. And so I downloaded that one. Okay. So if you're at home and you find a QR code in a flyer, newspaper, television, like me, I don't even have a smartphone, but I like to be able to look at QR codes. So I thought I could just use my laptop, but I ran into a little problem. So my laptop it's a gaming laptop. I don't do gaming, but I do a lot of video and audio stuff, so it's appropriate. But because of that, the camera that's in there is specialized for looking at people's faces at about 2 feet away. So it does a good job of that. But when I tried to put it up close, the QR code up close, you see how fuzzy that is? And it couldn't read it. So I was unable to just hold up, and it wasn't the QR code reader's fault. It was the camera that was the problem. Okay. Oh, oops, I managed to do that twice. Okay. All right. So now, what if you want to generate your own QR codes? There are several ways you can do it. You can go to a web-based QR code generator. And here's one that was online. You just type your text in, and then you copy and paste the image. Okay. Oh, that's pretty. Okay. Some QR generators will give you an option to track your QR code's use and provide statistics. So, for instance, if you had a website and you're wondering how many people have clicked on your QR code that you've stuck on the bulletin board at the grocery store, you can have the QR code generator send your QR code results to a website, and they'll keep statistics for you. But I don't know, most people probably won't want to do that, so you could pick that option or not. You can also customize your QR code and make it look pretty, and here's some people that did that. Okay. Because of the duplicate information and all the error checking, you can get away with using parts of the square for something else, and it'll still work, provided you let one of these QR code generators do it, so they know which parts they haven't used for the code. If you tried to do this yourself, likely, like just by overlaying some pictures, likely wouldn't work. Okay. Now, this Code 2 software that I was telling you about earlier, it also will help you generate QR codes. So the steps that you do, you have to put it in generate mode so it doesn't think it's trying to read one. And then you have to type in your URL, as I did at the bottom. So this one goes to a website that's one of mine. And then you can see that the QR code comes up. And then at the top, it gives you options. You can copy to the clipboard, or you can save it as a file. You can decide what size you want it, that sort of thing. And then once it's in a file, of course, you could print it out, put it on the bulletin board, or whatever you like to do with it. Okay. Now, QR codes are being used for entering passwords. And here's one way that it's done. And I made this one fuzzy on purpose because this is the QR code for our router at home. So the ACES software came with this already built into it. So you type in your password to your router, and then it pops up this QR code. So if you had visited my house, you could hold your cell phone up to Dan's cell phone, and then it would give you the password to the Wi-Fi. You could log in, or you could just tell it to you. Oh, yes. So Dan is pointing out that then you wouldn't know his password unless you decoded the QR code. So there's an organization called Wi-Fi that has a website that lets you do this. So you can print out, just print one out and put it on the wall, so you don't have to keep holding up your cell phone. And it's secure because once you've loaded up the page, you can disconnect from the internet, or you don't even have to have it online at all. Type in your information and then make the barcode, and then close the tab. So, okay. So I was curious. I wondered, one of these QR codes that makes passwords for Wi-Fi's, what code did they actually put in? So I put it into the Code 2 program, and because it'll read files from your desktop, and sure enough, this is what it looked like. So you could make your own, I guess, if you knew that. Okay. This wasn't a real Wi-Fi. This is just a test Wi-Fi that would really have your real name and password in there. Okay. Now, here's something that Wikipedia, or rather QR codes are being used for by Wikipedia. As you may know that Wikipedia has more than 200 languages. And if tourists are going around the world and they're going to places like museums, and it's hard, you can't have the information about the objects in the museum up in every language in the world, or you would have no room for the items that you're looking at. But Wikipedia has a website where if you put up a QR code and you put a URL from one of those languages, it will find all the articles in all the other languages that have an article about that item, and it'll look on your smartphone and see what language you like, and it'll send you the article in that language. So if you were in Bulgaria and you went to a museum and you saw an article, or you saw an item that was about a famous Bulgarian person, and then you could hold up your cell phone and it would give you an English article about that person. So this is an open source sort of thing where they're always looking for people to help, to contribute to that. Okay, you've probably seen QR codes on products. So this one is a webcam that we bought not long ago. And so if you click on the, or open up the QR code there, it'll send you to a website that will give you the manual that you've misplaced, you know, or maybe the driver or some interesting information, maybe a firmware upgrade, you never know. So Dan said that his router recently, when he had one and it sent him to a website that had the app that let him program his router. So here's a jar of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. You can barely see the QR code on the side, but it's there. If it were turned around, I was unable to turn it, so didn't have a real vial. So apparently the reason they use QR codes for that is that they want to keep track of some things that might change. The Moderna vaccine is so new, they might want to adjust the expiration dates as they get more information, for instance, and or they might have information about different lot numbers that they can't fit on the jar, and so that's why they're using QR codes. Okay, so then the third thing on this page is another use, and this is a CD. And you know, when we used to have albums, full-size albums, there was plenty of room to write all kinds of things on the album covers. But these days, not only are the CDs small, but sometimes people get information on things that's even smaller than that. So a QR code, which you see in the middle, can send you to all those liner notes that has pictures of the musicians and all kinds of information that you would have liked to write on your album, but you didn't have. I know lately I've bought a couple of albums where they tried to put everything on the album and the print is so small that I'm holding it like 6 inches from my face trying to read it. So it's much nicer to go to a website and see it. So here's a company that is not planning to change its website URL in the near future. They think they're pretty well stuck. Okay, QR codes are being used quite a bit for public information in museums. And here's one that's along a nature trail. And the fact that they are inexpensive and that they can lead to you could keep the information up to date is good. And like things that are out in the weather could get damaged and it'll be easy to replace. Okay. And that reminds me, that slide that I had earlier that was the wrong slide. I remembered what was on it. It was about click jacking. Okay, I want you to imagine that you're a nasty old scammer and you see this nice thing sitting out there. And so you take another QR code and you just paste it right over that one that goes to your virus-laden website. Okay, so nobody wants that. So if you're, it's important when you're choosing a QR code reader for your phone to make sure that it's one that allows you some leeway. Dan has one on his phone that is made by Kaspersky, and it goes to a secure website, or a secure browser rather, and lets you preview it there so that you can make sure it really went where you think it was going to go. And another one that we found lets you look at the URL first after it reads the QR code, and then you can click on that. Okay, so that's kind of important to be aware that just like other types of URLs, the QR codes can be scams, and you want to be careful. Just as if you received one in your email, you would hover over it first and see if it was the correct URL before you clicked. Okay, so a lot of people lately are putting up QR codes in the cemeteries because they are linking to obituaries, or if it's a famous person, might even go to a Wikipedia article or to a website that's all about the person. Now, QR codes are being used for payment systems, and I haven't said too much about that because I think it should be an expert that would talk about that. I don't want to say anything that would maybe be incorrect and cause people to lose any money. So I'm not saying too much about payment systems, but I do know that the QR codes are being used in many places in the world for public transit ticket readers. You can see people scanning their QR codes. Here's a piece of QR code art. So depending on which side you shine a light through, you can get your phone to send you to one of 3 articles about famous people, but only 3, because QR codes are not valid if they're read backwards. So if you shone through from the other side, the QR code reader would reject that. Okay, so QR codes are being used everywhere. Here's a fellow that's got a QR code on his back. He's a walking advertisement for something. So, so if you had a company and you wanted to make T-shirts to advertise your company, and instead of a URL or as well as a URL, you could put a QR code, and people with smartphones could just wander by and read the QR codes. Now, just when I was in the middle of making these slides, Dan decided to update his Firefox. And he was very surprised to see a QR code pop up, because Firefox as well, while you're updating your desktop, maybe you'd like to update your cell phone at the same time. And so he had a new phone that didn't have a Firefox on it yet. And he held it up to it, and it took him to a page where he could download Firefox onto his phone. He was happy about that. Okay,